Okay, committee will come to order. Chief Tidwell, Mr. Dixon, I would like to welcome you to today's hearing on fiscal 2016 budget request for the U.S. Forest Service. Overall, the President requests a total of $4.9 billion in discretionary funding for the Forest Service in FY 2016. This is $100 million less than FY 2015 enacted level. A total of $794 million is requested for wildland fire management. This represents more than 47% of the entire Forest Service budget. In addition, a budget cap adjustment of $854 million is requested. The subcommittee continues to be concerned about the cost of fighting wildfire and the effects of it on the Forest Service budgets, programs, and management. We were fortunate that 2014 fire season was below normal, with just 87% of the 10-year average of wildfires. There were more than 63,000 wildfires reported, with about 3.6 million acres burned. This is just 53% of the 10-year average. As we look at the 2015 season, we have reason to be concerned. Since January 1st, there's been more than 5,700 fires that have burned more than 91,000 acres of land. For comparison, about 68,000 acres burned over the same period last year. The 10-year average is 138,000 acres burned. These figures, combined with the fact that California continues to suffer through an exceptional drought, parts of the country, including Minnesota, have the potential for above normal wildfire activity in the next few months, are worrisome. We may be headed toward a fire funding shortfall again. I want to thank you, Chief Tidwell, for the administration's efforts to change the way we budget for wildfires. I also would like to express my appreciation for Congressman Simpson's efforts to educate our colleagues and keep the pressure on Congress to address the issue. 8 members of this subcommittee are co-sponsors of his bill. We continue to work on this. As I've mentioned in the subcommittee's previous hearings, we are operating in a very constrained funding environment. We are bound by the spending caps under existing law. Of course, we'll do our best to address the highest priority needs, but any increases most likely will have to be offset against other accounts and programs in this bill. Let me mention a few of the increases and decreases that the subcommittee will be closely reviewing and discussing today. The major increases include $5 million for trails, $8 million for the Forest Legacy Program, $16 million for land acquisition, $20 million for collaborative forest landscape restoration, and $30 million for deferred maintenance. Some notable reductions include $4 million for research and development, $4 million for international forestry, and I know Ms. McCollum this is an important issue for her, $4 million for urban and community forestry, $6 million for grazing management, which will be offset by a new fee, and $14 million for roads. The budget request also proposes again to consolidate a number of accounts into the Integrated Resource Restoration Account and the Land Management Planning, Assessment, and Monitoring Account. I look forward to hearing about how the IRR project has worked. Chief, I want to thank you for your work on behalf of the American people and nation's forests. We also thank you for the assistance your staff provides the subcommittee. They're a wonderful, helpful resource to us. Now I yield to the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. McCollum, for any opening remarks she would like to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Chief Tidwell, Mr. Nixon, it's good to see you again. With 983 million acres of national forest system lands and a rich history in forestry management, the Forest Service has established itself as one of the national and international leaders in natural resource conservation and recreation management. To carry out these important responsibilities, the Forest Service has requested $4.982 billion, which is actually $130 million less than what was appropriated in 2015. As I look over the 2016 budget request, I see a lot of familiarity with the 2015 request. And frankly, this presents this subcommittee with a rather mixed bag. While there are proposed budget increases to address certain pressing needs, there are also proposed cuts to other programs of interest to members on this subcommittee. I support the efforts to reform the way we fund wildfire costs, as many members on the subcommittee do, and I'm proud I'm one of the people who, as a co-sponsor or Representative Simpson's bill. We have seen wildland fire costs rise from 13% of the Forest Service budget in the 1990s to 50% of the budget today. Given the unpredictable nature of fire, we need a more predictable way of funding fires that doesn't continually threaten our other important service programs. I also appreciate the land acquisition funding requests this year, especially projects in the Chippewa and Superior National Forest. These projects are important to providing hunting and other recreational opportunities and to preserve important fish and wildlife habitat in my state and others. I am concerned, however, about proposed cuts to such areas as forest, rangeland research, international forests, and urban and community forests. Mr. Chair, we could have written our speech together. What signal is the Forest Service sending us when year after year we see proposed cuts in these important aspects of Forest Service operations? We need to do more, not less, on such programs as invasive species and to stop illegal logging that threatens the United States markets. I, for one, want to see the Forest Service have the fiscal resources it needs to carry out all aspects of its mission, and not just certain parts. I have noted in our previous hearings that the fiscal year 2016 budget requests for programs and agencies under the Interior and Environment subcommittees have not been extravagant. This is especially true for the Forest Service. When adjusted for inflation, the year 2016 request is well below the appropriated Forest Service a decade ago at 2005 for the level. Chief Tidwell, the Forest Service has its work cut out to meet its restoration goals and maintain its leadership on forest management in a period of limited financial resources. So I look forward to your testimony on how the agency is going to meet these challenges, and I thank you for being here today. Mr. Chair, thank you for the courtesy of an opening statement.
I thank you, and with that, Chief Tidwell, you're welcome to begin your statement.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member McCollum, Congressman Stewart, Congressman Kilmer, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today to present the President's request for our 2016 budget for the Forest Service. I appreciate your remarks. You captured some of the key points I want to stress today and also captured the concerns. We understand the budget constraints that we're having to deal with, and so this budget request does reflect some very difficult decisions that we have to make in our budget request. But there are some key items, key elements of this request that I just want to address. First of all, it does allow us to continue increasing the pace and scale, restoring the nation's forests and grasslands. We'll be able to treat another 2.9 million acres with this budget, restore over 3,200 miles of stream, restore 2,000 miles of road, and improve the ecological function on over 20 watersheds, and produce one of our key outputs of board feet, 3.2 billion board feet. This budget request asks for an expansion to be able to add additional collaborative forest landscape restoration projects. These projects that we now have 23 spread across the country have proven that when we make a commitment for a multi-year level of funding to large landscapes and work under a collaborative effort, we can make a significant difference over time. It provides a certainty for industry to be able to invest because they understand this is a multi-year commitment, and we'd like to be able to expand this program with this budget request. I also want to build on the success of this idea into areas in the country that we're not dealing with a fire-dependent ecosystem. In some places like in Minnesota, it may be some areas, even though we do have active fire in there from time to time, but if you look at the CFLR projects that spread across the country, there are parts of the country where we do not have fire-dependent ecosystems, where we also need to be able to demonstrate a long-term commitment to be able to address forest health. So it's one of the things that under this budget request I'd like to be able to pursue 5 or 6 pilot projects across the country. This budget request also allows us to continue our work in hazardous fuels, and we'll be able to treat another 1.7 million acres in the wildland-urban interface. We have list after list of where we've made the difference when we've been able to thin out our forests, reduce the hazardous fuels before we have a wildfire. Not only does it make it safer for our firefighters, it allows us to increase our suppression effectiveness, and it reduces the overall severity of the fire. This budget request will also allow us to continue to suppress 98% of the fires where we take initial attack, to have the resources, the aviation resources, the firefighters, the engines, to be able to continue to have that level of success when we're working with our partners. And it also requests a different way to fund fire suppression. You know, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member McCollum, thank you for your support and for all the committee's folks that have are co-sponsors on this bill. I appreciate the work that went on into it last year, but it's just essential that we find a way to solve this. The proposal basically continue to have 70% of our budget, the cost of dealing with fire suppression would continue to be in our budget. And then 30% would come out of the disaster relief fund. Now that 70% allows us to cover the costs for 99% of our fires. So we're talking about 1% of our fires that we feel should be considered a natural disaster, and to be able to have the costs of dealing with those fires come out of the disaster relief fund. Last year, we had 10 fires. The 10 largest fires cost $329 million. That was like 29.4% of our total costs last year. That was just 10 fires out of over 5,000 fires that we had last year. So this request will once and for all allow us to stop this disruptive practice of having to shut down operations in August, start pulling back funds, telling people to stop working, to be able to be positioned, to be able to transfer money, to be able to cover the cost of fighting fires. So I appreciate your support on that, and we want to continue to do everything we can to help you to build additional support so we hopefully can get this passed this year. A couple other things in this budget request. It does ask for, increases in our Land and Water Conservation Fund and our Forest Legacy funding. And it's been my experience that with our land acquisition, not only does it allow us to be able to improve the overall conditions of the landscape, it allows us to guarantee that there'll be public access, into the future in these areas. It reduces our costs for management, and with the Forest Legacy work, it also allows us to be able to keep private lands in a working condition versus having those lands go into some form of development. We also want to increase our efforts to restore some of our key recreation facilities and trails with this request for some additional deferred maintenance funding. We're also going to continue our work to be able to expand wood markets through the Secretary's Green Building Initiative, through our continued work with biomass utilization, and also to increase funding for our forest inventory and analysis. This is the data that all of us use, whether it's the federal agencies, the states, industry. It's the essential information that allows us to be able to track the changes in our forest resources in this country. We also include a framework in this budget to reauthorize secure rural schools. This is a program that's proven to be very successful for over the last 15 or 14 years. And it's something that, once again, we've included this in our budget request, and we stand ready to work with the committee to be able to find a solution to reauthorize this key authority. These are some of the key items I wanted to share with you. And once again, thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for beginning to explain the wildland fire management and the budget cap proposal. As you know, your budget once again proposes to establish a new budget framework for wildland fire management program A total of $794 million in discretionary funds is requested for fire suppression. An additional $854 million is requested for fire suppression through a budget cap adjustment. As you made aware in your opening statement, 8 members of this subcommittee are co-sponsors of Congressman Simpson's cap adjustment bill. I believe it won't be long before every member of the subcommittee signs on to it. We need to get this done. I remain hopeful we can get this legislation this year, given the drought situation in California and really throughout the West. Several of our national forests in my region are already preparing for the worst. For the sake of the new subcommittee members and the audience, can you explain the proposal and how the budget cap adjustment works?
Well, once again, 70% of the 10-year average is reflected in our budget request today, and that will cover the costs of dealing with 99% of the wildland fires that the Forest Service deals with. And once those funds are exhausted, or if we get a large catastrophic fire early in the year, then we can access the disaster relief funds that are available each year to be able to cover the costs for these large catastrophic fires, or if we run out of funds, late in the fire season, and then any fire cost could then go against be paid for out of the disaster relief fund. The concept here is really to be looking at these large catastrophic fires, and like I mentioned, just 10 last year, 10 out of 5,000 equaled 30% of our costs. Really should be considered a natural disaster, not unlike the way that we address the hurricanes, tornadoes, major flooding, in this country. That's basically, how it would work, and we would continue our focus on risk management to ensure that we're making the right decisions, the best decisions, to be able to suppress fires and to maintain our cost effectiveness when it comes to suppression. We got a great track record. I think it was 2 years ago, we showed that because of our approach with risk management, that we avoided costs around $377 million of suppression costs. So I think it's important for everyone to understand that even with this different approach, we're going to continue to have the rigor to be able to manage our suppression efforts so that we will continue to be cost effective in our approach. But 8 out of the last 10 years, we've exceeded the 10-year average.
And 8 out of the years that we've exceeded your budget request, is it also true we've always done a supplemental to pay back those accounts?
Yes. Sometimes it's a year later, but yes.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up is that we're going to pay for this one way or the other, but the problem is how you manage your department if you don't know what your biggest cost number is. Imagine running a business. I was in the restaurant business, and I could not estimate what my costs were going to be when I managed my restaurant. I don't know what my food costs are going to be or what my labor costs are going to be. In your case, your largest cost item is wildfire, and you can't guess what that's going to be. And so that's one of the reasons why this bill is important, that you can be able to better manage your department and be able to budget accordingly. One of the questions that I know that Mr. Simpson wanted me to ask, and I'll turn it over to Betty, is will the proposal amend the Stafford Act? And how
no.
And maybe you say, how does the Stafford Act relate to the Budget Control Act and the Disaster Release Fund?
It does not amend the Stafford Act. It just allows us to access, the funding that is provided for every year to deal with disasters in this country. And it's our understanding that we have never used all of the funds that are available. I think it's important that folks understand this would not have any impact on FEMA's ability to be able to carry out their responsibilities and to be able to request, funding to come out of disaster relief. So it will not have any impact on FEMA operations. The Congressional Budget Office, last Congress, they scored this as neutral, which makes your point, Mr. Chairman, that we pay the cost of fire suppression. The difference is just to be able to have the funds available so that we don't stop work, often preventive work, late in the year, and then have Congress just to appropriate the funds a few months later.
Right. By the way, I would hope that you are visiting with the committee, House Budget Committee Chairman Tom Price and the Chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, Mike Enzi, yes, to press the case for this, because we're going to need their assistance also. That, Ms. McCollum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to submit for the record a question on the Forest Service and mining. There's mining projects going all across the United States, and I want to understand that you have the tools that you need to help with restoration, resiliency, and protection. But I want to ask about the International Forestry Program in particular, because it helps with sustainable forest development overseas. It's one of our biggest soft power assets. Very, very important in the Middle East as well as in Africa and in other parts of the world. But most importantly, it helps to combat illegal logging, and it protects the United States forests from invasive species. So, I mean, we have a direct economic benefit here at home with the work that they do. Now, last year, the budget request eliminated the funding entirely. Congress wisely rejected that and put $8 million in. The Forest Service now is seeking to cut that in half to $4 million. So what happens to an under 50% cut to the Forest Service efforts to stop illegal logging, to stop invasive species from impacting the forest? Do we tell the insects at the port, only 50% of you come in because we've cut our budget? And then more importantly, what kind of message are we sending our international partners with the 50% cut?
Congresswoman, you laid out all the benefits of international programs, and I appreciate this reduction, would result in, a change in our permanent staffing. These are the people that we're able to attract to these jobs that not only have the forestry, the conservation skills, but they also have the language skills. They also are the folks that are able to develop relationships with their counterparts around the world, so that we have the effective delivery of these programs to prevent illegal logging, to be able to prevent impacts to migratory species that make all the difference in this country, and also to be able to promote sustainable forestry, sustainable conservation across the country. That being said, this is another example of the consequences we're dealing with a constrained budget. In this budget request, even though we're only asking for 70% of the 10-year average, the 10-year average has gone up $115 million between FY15 and FY16. So even 70% of that's $80-some million that we have to put that into our budget. So until we get this fixed some way to be able to recognize the cost of dealing with fire suppression, we're going to be faced with making these very, very difficult situations, and they're very hard trade-offs. But these are the things that we just have to deal with.
Mr. Tidwell, do you know the complement of staff that you have in the International Forestry Division?
I think we have around 65 folks that work in that staff group, and it's funded not only out of the appropriations, but because of the expertise that we have. We do a lot of work with USAID funding, and we'll be able to, but there's no question that this budget request will have an impact on our ability to be able to retain permanent staff. So
you'd go from 65 maybe down to 60 people, maybe fewer?
It'd probably be something like that.
Pretty hard to do the job with that amount. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
That's why we need a secure border to stop these illegal insects from coming into the United States.
I'm with you. That's why we're going to pass it today, right?
Okay, Mr. Stewart, you're recognized.
Well, I was going to say something really sarcastic, and I'm glad I didn't. Chief, we're glad you're here. I know of your career. We appreciate your many years of service. The only fault I can see in your bio is that you haven't served in the beautiful forests in Utah that I can see, although in that region.
Actually, I have. I was the forest supervisor on the Wasatch Cache National Forest.
you?
And also was a district ranger on the Uinta National
Well, see,
Forest.
that's what I thought, but I didn't see it in here, and so that's kind of what I wanted to mention if I had been remembering incorrectly. So thank you for this. So then I'm going to ask a local question, if I could, which many times these hearings kind of gravitate towards local issues, because I think, you know, it's important for us to have this opportunity to ask for our constituents and, you know, members back or our constituents back in the state and the district. And I know, or at least I suppose you're familiar, there was this 3 forest initiative that dealt with the, actually the Manti LaSalle, the Dixie, and also Fish Lake. And you were trying to do this, you know, a new forest plan, but it emphasized primarily grazing. And that had great concerns with, you know, members among the delegation, but also with, you know, those who would be most impacted at, you know, small ranchers who, you know, rely upon those grazing opportunities. We've been told by Kathleen Clark, who I think you know, and others, that you've pulled back on those plans. Is that true? Is that something that we're not going to go forward with right now?
Yes, the regional forester took a look at that situation and things that have kind of progressed and decided that it's actually better to stop with this current assessment and to look at grazing along with all the other multiple use when we revise the forest plans for those forests.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that, and I couldn't agree with you more. That this should be something of a broad overall plan, not something that's pulled out specifically. And I think you could understand, Chief, why that would be such a great concern for, you know, ranchers in that area, because they felt like they were being targeted and without much opportunity to influence that. So thank you for that. The other thing is, as I read through your biography again, which I'm familiar with, and reading here that under your leadership, the Forest Service is restoring healthy, resilient forests and grassland ecosystems that can sustain all the benefits Americans can get from their wildlands, including renewable supplies of wood and energy. And I appreciate that. I think one of the key words there is renew, because we didn't have healthy forests for a number of years. I don't know if you would agree with that, and I'm not saying all forests. But I think an initiative to make them more healthy than they have been is greatly appreciated by many of us. I would ask a kind of a broad question, and it ties with something in your testimony, and that is SRS. You know, we're well into the fiscal year. We don't know how that's going to be funded. That probably frustrates you as well as it does many of us. We've been told by leadership the House will move something in the first quarter, but I don't know the answer to that. And Chairman, maybe you do, and if you do, we'd love to hear it. But it seems to me a better answer, other than SRS and, you know, relying on the government to fund these schools. And I have a high school, for example, in my district, that will absolutely shut down if they don't get that funding. I think a better answer is, you know, let's maybe increase the availability of logging that's taking place, or used to take place there for many generations. It's no longer happening like it was, and so they're dependent on this SRS. Could you respond to that? And I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Well, Congressman, the Secure Rural Schools provides a safety net, you know, to the counties, and you know, today, especially with the markets that we have, that even though the markets have started to recover from the recession, we're still the base rates that that we charge for you know, timber across the country they're still close to what they were in the late 70s, and so that's had a significant impact in different parts of the country. The other part of it is that to be able to provide the level of funding that the Secure Rural Schools Authority has, I mean, we'd have to increase the harvest to around 16 billion board feet, which is not sustainable. It's not realistic. And even though today the fees that we collect through our recreation operations actually exceed what the fees that are generated for timber harvest, so it's more of a mix. But there's no question we want to increase our forest restoration. There's a need to increase you know, timber harvest. We've been very clear for the last few years about the need to address somewhere between 65 to 83 million acres of our national forest need some level of restoration. And about 12 to 15 million of that is going to require some form of a timber sale because of we just can't put fire into those areas. So we want to be able to increase that activity, increase the jobs. But there's a need to provide a safety net, for counties to be able to deal with when we hit recessions and see, drastic reductions in the market, the price of this material. And so I feel that's why, I want to work with the committee any way we can to be able to reauthorize this. We've included it in our the president's budget request every year that I've been here in this job to be able to continue this. I actually worked on the very first legislation of this and understand the importance of this. So I understand the need to be able to increase the amount of work we're doing, but at the same time, we need this safety net for our counties.
And I understand that, and believe me, I'm not suggesting that we could replace SRS with logging royalties completely, because I agree with you, that's probably not likely. But in conclusion, I guess, I'm guessing my time is up, but everything that we've talked about here are also interrelated. A healthy forest drives everything else. Healthy forest drives timber, and that helps with SRS. It helps us with fire suppression, obviously, and it helps us with grazing, all of these issues. And I'll maybe just conclude with this thought. When I was in the Air Force, flew helicopters on a station at Spokane, and we'd fly all through this area doing rescues and picking people up. And although I didn't realize it at the time, I remember flying over forests and looking at seeing beautiful green forests, and then there was a boundary, and then it became this dark kind of dead forest where there was so much more dead timber, and I didn't know why. But at the time, it was that one was a state forest and the other was a federal forest. And as I started out saying, we didn't manage our forests very well for a number of years. I think we're doing a better job at least that's my impression. I think it's important to do. Thank you for being willing to help in that, and let's continue to move forward on that. Thank you, sir.
Just a quick the issue that the gentleman brought up on secured rural schools. That's kind of associated with Land and Water Conservation Fund and PILT, and we all need to work with Mr. Bishop to get authorizing language on and all this, and a funding source for we can work together to help resolve these issues that are very important in the West, especially.
Well, let's go to his office right after this hearing. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Mr. Stewart for raising the issue around secure rural schools. It's a big deal for a lot of our districts. I had two areas I wanted to talk about. One is sustainable harvest. I think the Forest Service has been focused on supporting restoration, particularly in dry and fire-prone areas, and I certainly get that prioritization given the threat of wildfires. But I'm concerned that we've not dedicated adequate resources to maintaining sustainable harvest in all of our national forests. The Olympic National Forest is in my district is a wet forest. Supports multiple uses, including timber harvest, also has a need for management to promote resiliency and diversity in the forest. So I want to get a sense from you, what actions are the Forest Service taking to ensure that all of our forests, including those that aren't necessarily fire prone, are being supported by sustainable harvest levels? And then on top of that, we've worked in our neck of the woods to stand up a timber collaborative where folks on the ground are working together to increase timber harvest, but funding continues to remain a very significant impediment to seeing progress. So how can the agency, whether it be being more efficient or using the dollars it has more effectively, but allocate resources so that we're actually rewarding those efforts where we've got folks on the ground actually trying to look at how we can manage our forests in a responsible way?
Well, Congressman, the first key is what you mentioned, that's these collaborative efforts, to be able to bring people together with diverse interests, to be able to really understand what needs to be done on the landscape, and whether it's a dry, fire-prone forest or a wetter forest, there are still forest health issues that need to be addressed, and that's the thing that we're striving for. So even there on the Olympic National Forest, there are needs for us to be able to do active forest management, to provide for diverse habitats and not just late cereal habitats. The solution here is through these collaborative efforts where we've had tremendous success across the country, where in the past we were at loggerheads could not get anything through. There was always, a high level of concern about any active management. And we're moving past that. But there's places like in your part of the country where we can actually, if we need more old growth, we can get in there and be able to do thinnings in some of the plantations and actually accelerate old growth and be able to remove quite a bit of biomass, but at the same time be able to promote that. But it's really to look at the landscape, what needs to be done on that landscape, and the key is to bring people together so that they understand that this is work that's going to benefit not only local industry, but it's going to benefit wildlife, it's going to benefit the watershed, benefits all the ecological services that come off of these landscapes.
Well, so I agree with the value of the collaboratives. Do you, and I'd certainly like to work with you to see how do we actually reward those communities that are doing that hard work of identifying ways to sustainably manage and to increase harvest levels. The other thing I wanted to ask about was wood and commercial buildings. We've seen that engineered wood products can have a lot of potential for creating a new market for building materials. They can turn low-value wood products into strong and durable products and even support commercial high-rise buildings. They're strong, they're fire-resistant, they conserve energy, so a lot of wins there. But it seems to me that the U.S. is behind in this. There's innovations happening all over the place, the UK, Canada, elsewhere, but we seem to be lagging, particularly when it comes to tall wood buildings. How do we get past that? How do we foster some opportunity in the U.S. so that same kind of innovation that we're seeing in other countries is happening here in the United States?
Well, we need to be able to demonstrate that wood is a good building material for, besides single-family homes and small commercial buildings. We're thinking up to 8 to 10 stories. So Secretary Vilsack initiated a competition to be able to put basically a funding available for folks to be able to compete to design a multi-story building so that we would then be able to move forward and get it constructed. We think this is the best way is to be able to demonstrate that this is actually is the green building material. As you mentioned, there's many countries in Europe that already build above 4 stories. Canada is also interested in this. But United States, we are somewhat held with our building codes to this 4 stories. And especially with the engineered wood products like these cross-laminated timbers that our forest products labs developed, we can show without any question that we can build 8, 10 stories with wood. It has the strength, it passes all the tests as far as being heat and fire resistant. So that's our key element, I think, is to be able to demonstrate this. And that'll show the engineers, it'll show the architects that, hey, here's another way to build a multi-story building.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And again, that's another thing I'd love to be able to work with you and the rest of the team on. I've got other questions, but I'll add a deference to the rest of the committee. I'll yield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chief, every time I raise questions about forests, I usually get skeptical looks around here like, are there trees in Oklahoma? But there really are, and we really do have forests. Yeah, I know I'm going to have to bring back visual proof at some point. But I actually have a series of questions, and they relate to a very specific institution in my district. And so you might not be able to answer these, and they're not gotcha questions. It may be best to submit them for the record, but I want to go through it if I may. Again, much to the surprise, I think probably a number of people on this committee, Forest Service operates a number of Job Corps centers, essentially as a contractor working for the Department of Labor. And I'm sure you're aware DOL is in the process of closing Treasure Lake Job Corps Center, which is run by the Forest Service, actually located in the Wichita Mountain Wildlife Refuge in my district. And it strikes me as unusual because it's the only Job Corps center any place in America out of the 165 that are being closed. So I'll have a series of questions for my friends at the Department of Labor. But just, has the Department of Labor been open and transparent with the Forest Service during the closure process?
Yes, they have. We've worked very closely with Department of Labor on this, and with the need to reduce budgets for the Job Corps centers, we had to work together to identify which ones should be considered for closing. And so through negotiations, we got down to closing one that happened to have the lowest level of performance. And we've worked there at that Job Corps Center to try and improve that performance. But when you have, there's always going to be one that's going to be the lowest. And so when you look at having to make a tough decision about closing a center, it just kind of comes out to be the math that this one has the lowest score.
Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not skeptical, and I know these are tough decisions for all of you to make. And but I just want to take a long, hard look when there is only one. Second question, did the Department of Labor provide the employees at Treasure Lake with adequate notice and due process as part of the closing?
Well, those are our employees. Those are Forest Service employees, and so we've worked to be able to notify our employees and try to find another opportunity for them, and hopefully that most of our employees will be able to move to another Job Corps Center. We have enough vacancies in the system to take care of them. However, there'll be some that for a variety of reasons cannot move, and we expect that those folks will need to leave our employment.
And now that the students have actually been transferred from the site, as I understand it, how many employees remain? And I assume you're responsible for the salaries, or is Department of Labor? I mean, how's that work?
Well, we're working that out. The Department of Labor funding for the Job Corps program, as long as the center's open and has students, then their appropriations cover that. As soon as the students are gone, then it's a question. And so we're trying to get it closed down just as quickly as we can, and have a few employees there to take care of just the maintenance of the facility. But we're working very closely with the Department of Labor so that we can move our employees to another center as quick as we can and just avoid this problem.
With the facility being closed down, what are the costs of, if any of, well, there'll be costs. Do you raise the site? Do you task the site for other purposes? What are the opportunities of using it, or do we literally restore the land to its original condition?
Well, I'll have to get back to you on that one. This site is actually under the authority of the Fish and Wildlife Service. So when we move our employees off of it, we need to hand it back to them, and we'll have to get back to you on that next step.
I would appreciate that, and if there are any considerations for use for another capacity, there's obviously military post in the immediate vicinity. There's a large veterans population. It just would be a shame to lose the facility itself. Again, if there's any other appropriate use for it, so would appreciate a response back. With that, let me turn next to my good friend from Maine, Miss Pingree.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work and your department's work on behalf of our forests. I guess unlike Oklahoma, Maine is a state where we're very attached to our forests. 86% of the state is forested land. I think that might be the highest percentage of any state in the country, and we have very different issues, obviously, than many of the states out west. But I just want to talk to you a little bit about the Forest Legacy Program. I see there's $61 million of funding in there, so thank you to the chair and ranking member and everyone who has supported this in the past. For us in Maine, we're beneficiaries of, I think, about 700,000 acres of protected land through that program, and some others that haven't even been accounted for. So that's really important to us, and the ability to have these private-public partnerships and work with some of the conservation partners who care deeply about keeping our forest land in Maine. I think in particular with, being the most forested area on the East Coast and having so many population centers having access to Maine, it's critically important for the natural habitats it protects. Obviously, our forests have been a big part of the Maine economy over time, and we're very anxious to make sure this program continues. So I just wanted to let you talk a little bit about it. I'm glad to see, as I said, that there's $61 million in the president's budget to fund it, that there's 30 states on the list for their worthy programs, including Maine. And I just want to hear you talk a little bit about the role it plays and how you see its critical nature into the future.
Well, thank you. It's been a very successful program, and part of it is that we take each state submits their recommendations for their projects, and these all come from willing landowners that have tremendous local support. And so through this effort, we're able to acquire a conservation easement that allows the landowners to stay on the land, It allows them to be able to continue to practice forestry versus having to sell out and then probably to some other form of development where we would lose all the benefits from that forested ecosystem. So that's really the key benefit. There are families that get in situations through inheritance or whatever that if they don't have another out, they're forced to sell. And you're fortunate in Maine that you haven't seen all the level of development that's occurred in other parts of the country, but all indications it's headed that way. And so this is just another excellent program to be able to keep these working landscapes working, keep forested landscapes working. And then the public receives all the benefits. The areas to go hunting and go fishing, the clean water that comes off of well-managed forests. And so the public gets a lot of extra benefits out of this that sometimes we take for granted.
Yeah, and I just want to concur, you're right. Maine has a lot of concerns about the potential for development, and I think this downturn in the economy actually slowed a little bit of that down, but as we see the economy improving, and again, our proximity to population centers makes that land very vulnerable to that, and we really appreciate having this opportunity. I know when you see aerial photos of flying over the east coast of the country, it's one of the few black, dark areas that are actually left, and that's critically important for so many reasons. So thank you, and I'll yield back.
I'll go next to my good friend from New York, Mr. Israel.
Thank you very much. I know we're up against some votes, so I'll be very brief. Chief, Mr. Cole talks about no trees in Oklahoma. People assume there are no forests on Long Island, that it's just Starbucks and malls. But actually, in Fort Taunton in Queens, we have an urban field station, which is a research facility that's a wonderful partnership between the Forest Service, New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, and recently the Natural Areas Conservancy. Can you speak briefly to the importance of those kinds of urban field stations, and do you have the resources necessary to continue those partnerships?
Well, Congressman, I've had the pleasure of actually going up there and meeting with our scientists and also with the folks from New York City Parks to be able to firsthand see the benefits, the difference that we're making by having our scientists be able to work, in a large city like that, but to be able to look at the benefits of urban forests in this country. Actually, I think New York City has something like over 20,000 acres of forest just in that city. Around the country, we have way over 100 million acres of urban forests. So that provides us kind of the lab to be able to understand what do we need to do to be able to not only maintain urban forests, but to be able to justify and quantify the benefits, and not just the hard economics of it, but also the intrinsic values of having green spots, forested areas, especially in our cities. We have the data that shows it produces, not only the clean air, it reduces the amount of infrastructure we need to deal with stormwater. There's no question it increases the value of homes. We have studies now that show that it actually increases retail opportunities. People like to shop on tree-lined streets. But the real benefit is to be able to understand, how to be able to do it in large communities like that. So that's where the essential of our research station there is that these folks get to work in that environment, and especially with such a great partnership we have with the city.
Well, thank you, and I hope you'll come back to Fort Taunton. I'd love to visit with you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if we can, we're going to take a brief recess until the chairman returns, and that way Mr. Israel and I can both get down and, oh, here he is, so. Okay.
Okay. Last week, from my home area, since we had some home questions here, a risk assessment and modeling firm from Irvine, California, released a report estimating that nearly 900,000 homes in the West are at high or very high risk of being damaged or destroyed by wildfires. California tops the list with more than 50,000 homes that are in a very high risk category. Overall, the estimates are it would cost more than $237 billion to rebuild these homes. Reports like this can help the Forest Service and other federal and state agencies to focus on specific areas where mitigation resources should be spent. They can also help individual homeowners and communities take action. The question is, have you had an opportunity to review that report?
I have not had the opportunity to see that report. I'm not surprised with the information you're sharing. It tracks with what we know and what we continue to see. It also, I think, provides support for our budget request to be able to continue the level of hazardous fuels funding that we've had in the past, to be able to address those conditions. You know, we lose 3,000 on average, 3,000 homes a year to wildland fire. So when we talk about these being natural disasters, 3,000 homes, we can make a difference. And we have plenty of examples, some in your state, where by doing the treatments ahead of time, we can save those homes. We still have large fires. The King Fire was an example in your state last summer, a large fire, but because of the work that we did ahead of time to reduce the fuels, we significantly reduced the threat to the communities.
Well, I can tell you through my own experience that your fuel reduction program, say around Lake Arrowhead, Big Bear, up in the San Bernardino National Forest, had an effect of not having a potential fire. And the same thing applies up around the Idlewild area. That we had these fuel reduction programs. So they do work, and they certainly reduce risk, and it certainly informs the communities that they need to work with you to do that. Does the Forest Service work with private sector assessment companies or their insurance industry to identify and mitigate risk?
You know, we work with everyone to look at how to really mitigate the risk, and also our key partners are the states. To be able, ideally, we want to be able to not only do the treatments on the national forest, but at the same time to be doing the treatments on the private ground, the adjacent private ground. And we find, you know, that is the best solution. So we work very closely with them through the states, you know, some of the hazardous fuels funding that we provide, and also the grants we provide to the states, to be able to look at how we can really make a difference on looking across the landscape and not just on the national forest or just on private land. So we'll work with insurance companies, anyone that provides, you know, the information that we have that we need to be able to really focus where we need to put these treatments.
Moving over to the aviation assets, and obviously there's many parts to your aviation program. The National Defense Authorization Act transferred 7 C-130s and 15 C-23s, the little Sherpas. I used to see those in Iraq quite a bit from the Coast Guard and the Forest Service, and provided $130 million for planes to be retrofitted. The FY 2015 omnibus provided $65 million for you to acquire next generation air tankers. The budget request for FY 16 includes funding to support all firefighting aircraft, including the contracts and management costs for up to 21 air tankers. This includes legacy, next generation, and one agency-owned C-130 aircraft. What is the status of your aircraft fleet?
Well, we'll have you know, 6 of the legacy large air tankers available this year, and we'll have up to 15 of the next generation contract aircraft. We also hope to have one of the C-130Hs that's available later this year, that will put a MAFS unit into that to be able to start to use that aircraft, even though we won't see any more of the C-130Hs for probably maybe another one in 16, but in 17 is when we will expect to have those come on board. We also have the arrangements we've had in the past with to bring aircraft down from Canada and Alaska. Plus, we also have the MAFS units from the Air Force and Air Force Reserve. So we'll have adequate large air tankers again this year, but and we'll be moving forward as we acquire the C-130Hs to have that part of our base. And then also we're moving forward to do a business case analysis on what is the best approach to use the $65 million that was provided last year to acquire another aircraft.
The C-23s, have they been transferred yet? Are they in use?
They've been transferred. and we'll be going through those to make some minor modifications on those and be able to start to move forward with those to be based. That'll be our smoke jumper aircraft across the board. We feel by using the same aircraft at all of our smoke jumper bases that it's not only more efficient, it's a more safe platform to be able to use versus a variety of aircraft that we have. So we'll be moving forward with beginning to put those into place, probably, you know, a couple of them maybe this year, but then next year we'll be using them.
How many people can you put in there?
You know, you can easily, you know, 8. There's room for 8 in those planes. I'd have to.
Yeah.
You might be able to get 10 in there, but
Yeah, pretty tight. How are you managing these aircraft? Is there an office that you have dedicated to manage that, or how do you manage that?
well, we're going to as far as the maintenance for those planes, and we're going to use a contract to be able to cover the maintenance on those planes. We'll have our staff to ensure that they meet all of the safety inspections, et cetera, but we'll be using a contract to be able to maintain those and probably fly them too.
Okay, Ms. McCollum?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that Mr. Israel and you started talking about urban and community forests, so I just want to go back and touch that again because, you know, I guess you'd made a comment that there's a new study saying that tree-lined urban streets increased retail shopping, and being a former person in retail and retail management in the private sector, you know, that can be a really good thing. But I also know that when there's green space in urban areas, it reflects in calmness for, you know, communities. There's less bad activity in them. Home values stabilize and stay. So there's a lot of economic benefit. So when the Forest Service is proposing the same cut, 16% cut, $4.3 million cuts to the urban and community forestry program, you can see why some of us are, you know, become a little alarmed. Last year, you said that there'd be no reduction in urban and community forestry. You stated that you believed that these programs would be taken care of as part of the proposed increase to the landscape scale restoration. So why would we be taking money for the urban community forestry program and putting them in another program? I mean, just why not just fund the urban community forestry program where there's clear accountability, there's great transparency, and there's no question about where the biggest populations of our country are, that our youth are still having a chance to be engaged in forests. 83% of the population is living in urban areas. And that goes back to my, you know, previous comment, and I was talking about international forestry and the cuts to that. But when you start cutting pest and invasive species, you know, just as you're forced to do, and there's, you know, pages and pages of the little pests, right? There's proposed budget cuts in there. So gypsy moth and emerald ash borer are, you know, are something that a lot of our urban areas are very, very concerned about or have to go in and do reforestation. So why do you, not you personally, but why does the Forest Service keep, you know, putting this forward when you pretty much know, I mean, with the days of earmarks being gone, it's the only way many of us in urban areas can make sure that we have urban forestry and community forestry programs moving forward.
Well, the concept with the landscape scale restoration was to take you know, funds from a variety of our state and private programs and put it into one restoration account that would allow states to be able to propose projects that go beyond just one concept, because you could have an urban situation, also a forest health situation, where by having a larger pot of funds, it allows them to accomplish multiple objectives with just one fund. It does increase the competition, which we feel actually brings, you know, more effectiveness to our program. It also lines up very well with the state's action plans that each state has implemented, or they've completed, and are implementing their state action plans. And so this concept, it tracks with our integrated resource restoration, but on a much smaller scale, to provide a set of funds for the states that give them a little more flexibility about what's the best way to accomplish the work that needs to be done on a broader landscape. And at the same time, to be able to maintain the majority of our urban community funding program.
Well, so the National Council of State Legislators might think this is a great idea, but does the League of Cities think this is a great idea?
I don't know.
Because, you know, I go down to my lowest denominator. I work for the people in the cities, and having been both a state legislator and a city council member, I can tell you how hard it is for small and suburban communities to be going in and competing for some of these grants at a state level. So, you know, I'm gonna contact the League of Cities and the League of, you know, the mayors and see if they feel confident that the states are going to really make sure in this competition, one, that urban and community areas are going to be able to compete, and two, that they think with even in the state system that they're going to be able to compete, because it might be a very noble idea for all these grants out here, but these grants cost communities and they cost cities a lot of money to start competing with larger groups and larger counties that maybe have a forest industry, great noble project to be done, but all of a sudden that's what they're up against competing, and then they don't have the economic line in there, because what you pointed out is great, but it's not tangible. I mean, it's anecdotal, and it is something that, you know, we're not allowed to do dynamic scoring on. And so I'm very concerned to move away from this with the best of intentions, and I truly believe it's with the best of intentions, could have some harm to it that would prove itself irreversible in future years as budgets continue to get tighter. So I'm not a real fan. Okay. I think you figured that out. So, Mr. Chair?
Thank you. We discussed this just prior to the hearing starting. I have a friend, a member that is very interested in PCAD technology, so I better ask the question because he'll ask me. And it seems that the technology, it seems on the face of it, technology that would be more cost effective would benefit the Forest Service. And we understand that there are technical problems that need to be worked out. You responded that your staff reviewed PCAS in 2011. You had concerns about its accuracy, its safety, the personnel on the ground. However, you offered to take another look, and so I guess I'll ask the question, did you conduct another review on PCAS?
You know, I'm not aware that we've conducted another review, but we're always open, you know, to new technology. So the concerns that I've expressed in the past, it's my understanding those are still exist, you know, and so it's whether with PCADs or other ideas that are out there, you know, we're always interested in that, but at the same time, it's proponents are going to have to be able to show that you know, their ideas are something that would not only be effective as far as retarding fire, but at the same time, you know, address our safety concerns.
As you know, I mean, if we can use existing inventory of aircrafts as small as our smallest aircraft and as large as a C-17, and for some of the larger fires, if the technology existed to do that, that would certainly could provide you more operational flexibility in case of fire. So that's the intent behind this, and so I hear that they're making progress on that technology. So it wouldn't hurt maybe to take another look at it.
Okay, thank you.
The other issue, getting away from fire for a second, is some farming activity that's taking place in the national forest, which has nothing to do with normal farm activity, as you can probably guess. And that's the reports I've been getting about the growth of illegal marijuana cultivation in public lands, and it affects how it affects the environment, employee, public safety, tourism. Maybe it helps tourism, I don't know, but certainly has an effect on law enforcement. There has apparently been a report Have you been able to review any of these reports about some of this illegal activity taking place in the Forest Service?
Well, I get briefed on, that activity.
Or I guess we've been asked for we asked for a report also.
Well, I'll get back on the status of the latest report, but there's no question this is an ongoing problem, and we see it, pop up in almost anywhere across the country, depending on the year. It's something that you mentioned all the impacts. It not only affects the safety of the public, because sometimes we have to actually close areas of the forest where we have this activity until we can get in there and get it cleaned out. It also impacts the environment as far as with water quality, and also in your state has had a significant impact on some sensitive species such as fisher. When UC Davis found out that when they saw the fatalities in fisher, they were able to trace it back to actually to the pesticides that these the folks working these marijuana grows were spreading around to deal with rodents and stuff, and actually it was killing the fishers. So a species that we go to great lengths to be able to provide habitat for, and sometimes we have to change our management to be able to provide fisher habitat, and then we're finding out here's that probably having the biggest impact is from this marijuana growing activity.
When you're doing your planning, do you bring law enforcement into to talk to you about how you're planning and how you're operating some of these national forests?
Yes, I mean our law enforcement folks are spread across the country, and provide that that insight and working, of course, with the other federal agencies and also with county law enforcement to be able to address these issues. With our intent is to eradicate this activity whenever we find out that it's going on.
As you know, there's violence because folks are protecting these grows, and people can unsuspectingly just walk in on it and get themselves in a fix. So we've had that happen in California on a number of occasions. So it's a serious issue, and so it's certainly something that we need to look into. Okay. Any additional questions?
Well, Mr. Chair, I was going to ask a question for the record, but the fact that I have time, I want to just ask it now, and if you need to, please get back to me. The budget request notes that the Forest Service is estimating fiscal year 2016 that your agency will be administering at least 8,000 new and ongoing mineral operations to ensure compliance with operating plants and environmental standards for the protection of surface resources. And there's a number of controversial mining proposals on or adjacent to national forest lands, including Rosemont Copper Mine, the Coronado National Forest in Arizona, Resolution Copper Mine in the Tonto National Forest in Arizona, Polymet Mine on the Superior National Forest in Minnesota. So they're all over, and these are new things that are coming up that you have to react to. And in fact, in Minnesota Superior National Forest, where the mine leases are being managed by BLM, adjacent to Boundary Water Canoe Area Wilderness, the Forest Service manages, and that's the most visited wilderness in the country. So if the copper nickel mining is allowed in the Superior National Forest, the potential for water pollution is very real, and it would be devastating to the Boundary Waters Canoe Area. So does the mining related to water pollution in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, is that a concern to the Forest Service? And do you have the tools? I mean, do you really have the tools in your budget in the Forest Service available to mitigate, to eliminate, to look into these negative impacts to our national forest lands and waters? I mean, your budget hasn't gone up, but these requests are going up.
Yeah. Congresswoman, that's just the ongoing issues that we deal with across the board with all the activities that occur on the national forest. The demand for more activity, more things from the public continues to go up. And so when it comes to minerals, we have to set our priorities. We continue to work very closely with the Bureau of Land Management. They have the responsibility for the subsurface. We deal with the surface. And so we're responsible to analyze what are they going to be the impacts to surface disturbance, and how to mitigate those. And especially when it comes to water and groundwater, it's usually some of the key issues when it comes to any of these large mines. So this is something we do a lot of this work across the country. We always have. And so we just have to set priorities, and sometimes we're not able to be as responsive to the proponents as much as they'd like to see us be able to move as quick. But it's just a matter of setting priorities. But we do have concerns about water quality, whether it's in Arizona or whether it's in Minnesota. The concern with the boundary waters. I was able to visit that part of your state last year, and without any question, it just seems like everyone in Minnesota, they either have a cabin up there or they would like to have a cabin up there, but it is a key part of that state. It's something the state is very proud of, and it's essential that we take the necessary steps to protect the water quality of that area as much as we can of every area in the United States.
Well, one of the things that in watershed basins, and I know it's different topography in different parts of the United States, is we're a very water-rich state up in that part. So, and water moves around, it does no boundary, it's above the ground, it's under the ground, streams, rivers, lakes, wetlands, all filtering through and around. And so one of the things that I think we need to be very cognizant of is not just that area immediately adjacent to it, but as other areas look to do mining development in that water basin, the accumulation effect of what's going to happen. And one of the things I asked the EPA administrator about is, we can't start lowering standards because of the accumulation effects of this. So I look forward to working with you to understand better on how we're making sure that for the next generations we're protecting these fragile waters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And if you have too much water there in Minnesota, you can always send some out to California.
Sir, I respect you a lot, but we're keeping our water. We have to share it with Canada.
There you go. Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, good to see you. Welcome. Mr. Chairman, I know that we've run a little late with votes. I'd be happy to submit my questions for the record and try to keep us on time. And Chief, look forward to working with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any additional questions? No, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sure there'll be some additional questions for the record. We'll keep the record open for a few days for that. And with that, thank you. We appreciate both of you coming today. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Keep you guys on schedule.
Thank you.